I'm Sue Cohen with the San Marcos Heritage Association, and we have the distinct privilege of interviewing Ted and Frances Breihan today. And when did you first come to San Marcos? Tell us a little bit about that. Go ahead.
1951.
And what brought you here, Ted?
We had just gotten married. Both of us lived in Kerrville, and we just gotten married, and came over to San Marcos. I was working on my college degree in industrial arts. I came to Texas State University, which was not that same name then.
And what was the university like then, Frances?
Well, it was only 3,000 students, so we all knew each other. We'd meet with Bob Kircherville under the art department for called the Bobcat Den, and we'd have coffee, and everybody got to visit. We moved into the student housing, which is no longer there. It was those Quonset huts type things from Camp Gary. They moved those things down there, and that's where we live.
And where were they located?
Right by the railroad track.
Where Strand Gym is
yeah,
now.
That's why it's all gone.
They had those GI barracks there.
I couldn't remember what that was called. But the interesting thing was, of course, with Ted's interest in industrial arts, he built bookshelves to separate some of our rooms down there, and he even got into renting refrigerators for people, but everything was to bring in. So that was how he started a little business.
We only
there.
had ice boxes in it, didn't have refrigerators.
And they delivered ice?
They delivered ice. You could go buy ice, or they would deliver it. They'd charge you more if they delivered it. But I bought old refrigerators and brought them over here and rented them to people. For whatever they paid for ice, I'd rent them a refrigerator for that same price to make a little extra money.
Everybody wanted our apartment because it was so nice with the bookshelves and the additional things that Ted added. You remember that?
What is a Quonset hut? It was a one-room?
Well, there were four beds.
They were long GI barracks.
They brought them in from the Gary Air Force Base. Didn't they do that?
No, they built them for the students that were going to the university during the war. They had training classes here, and they stayed there rather than staying out of Camp Gary. There were barracks that they were living in, and when the war was over, they converted them to GI student housing for married couples that were going to school.
So you guys came from Kerrville, both of you. What was San Marcos like compared to Kerrville? Was San Marcos a big city, or was it similar to Kerrville, or?
It didn't quite have the activities that we experienced in Kerrville. You remember all the 4th of July things? I missed that most of all when we first moved here. There weren't any celebrations. No, we always had a parade and all sorts of things going on in Kerrville. So it took a while for me to adjust, literally, to be
For you
here.
to get here and start a lot of those celebrations right over the years.
I was thinking about, I'd always wait for Ted when he opened up his business, because he always had service calls. He was the electrician, so he was there. But I remember Simon's Bakery and how we would go in there for coffee and all the good things that Blossom would fix, that sort of thing. So that was kind of a hubbub. Not only did they bake the bread and do all the deliveries, but you could go in and sit down and have coffee.
Well, while we were going to school before I graduated, worked for Earl McGee, had a electric and appliance store on LBJ Street, about where the
Some of those tattoo places are now, aren't they, Ted?
Well, there was a drugstore there, and Earl McGee.
San Marcos.
On LBJ.
Sareurs.
What's the store that's there now?
I think it's the tattoo place.
The lady that has the stores on LBJ.
The Paper Bear? No.
Well, the lady sells all the little merchandise on LBJ Street. They're trying to. She's going to sell it now.
Oh, he's talking about Paper Bear.
Paper Bear.
Right.
Just right down.
I'm saying it was the next block.
So you went to work. You went to work for Earl doing what?
Earl McGee doing electrical work, connecting. He was selling appliances, not hook them up.
And that's how you got in. You got into
So
here.
Then he decided he didn't want to fool with it anymore. So I kept on doing electrical work and wiring houses and
So you
things here in
opened
town.
your electrical company, and
About 1953, 1954.
how many other electricians were there in San Marcos at that time?
Well, there was Mr. Saltonstall. and,
Smith, J.B. Smith.
Maybe two other people that did some electrical work, not many. But John Stokes came here shortly thereafter and started building houses. We did a lot of work with John all through the years. But I just started going from that. Mr. Cummings came into town and started his feed grain business out at Cummings Farms. And that was interesting because I'd worked on grain elevators and such as that before and knew a little bit about them. But that was all new things, and Ocarina started growing, and there was all kinds of new inventions that were going into Ocarina. Buckwind drifted into town.
And you worked on that?
Buckwind and I did all kinds of things together down there.
Those big lily pads and things, you worked on
Yes,
the
ma'am.
wire and that?
Trying to make enough water flow to make them turn and do what he wanted them to do. And we went from there to Georgetown and did some water fountains in Georgetown.
But the fun
Buck was a very interested man, just unique man with a mind that kept going all the time.
creative.
Yeah.
New things that he was so far ahead of you, you'd have to run to catch up with him.
I bet that was something. Go
But the
ahead.
fun thing about the Ocarina was that Ted wired and hooked up those things that went on Skyride. But the instructions came in German. So Ted had to hook all of that up with the help of the Swiss man that came with that. But he asked us, children and Francis, to do the first ride across that lake. So we initiated those things across. Of course, I don't like heights anyway, so it was really quite a fun thing to do. But the kids, of course,
the first ones to ride the sky ride.
We were the first ones.
So your first child was born in 1953?
Same as you.
Uh-huh. And where did y'all live then when Don was born?
We were living on Linda Drive, and I experienced the first flood since I was in San Marcos.
Oh.
Oh yes, that same river was kicking up, and we were there, and that's when we decided. Well, first it wasn't the first one. I was in the student housing, and Ted was in San Antonio. I did not have a car. The Blanco was backing up the San Marcos River.
Just like it did
I had
in
just
this
bought
last
a piano, and he had had a pair of new cowboy boots. I didn't know what to do but just put towels around the piano and put his boots up on that high shelf that he built and waited it out. But everybody was evacuated. When that river backs up, it was all coming up into Sewell Park, which is right there.
Right.
It didn't get that high, it went down.
It went down, but I tell you,
Did you lose your piano?
No,
No,
I didn't. It didn't quite get that high, but I expected to have some wet feet out of that. But he got home.
We just decided we weren't going to get caught in another flood, so
No.
we moved up on the Hillcrest, bought some land up on Hillcrest back at the university.
Since
And y'all-
1956.
Y'all
we've
been there all that
Got
time.
away from the flood zone.
That's right.
That
So
was
we knew
probably-
what the water would do.
And it's still doing it.
That's right. That's right.
Trying to think. So y'all have 4 children, and they all went to school in the public school system here, and you
That's
were
right.
a stay-at-home mom,
I
and
was just saying that. I
active-
did go to school too at that time.
okay, I was wondering.
Yeah, I did go, but by the time my 4th child came, I felt like it was better for me to be at home. I looked at the future of what I might do with my education, and I was already involved with church work and music through my church and the one at Wimberley and everywhere else. So I just decided that was enough for me.
Well, you've both been involved in a tremendous amount of community service to this community in the last 64 years through city council, church, school work, volunteer work. What
Well-
year did you serve on the city council, Ted?
Two terms in the middle to late 70s. We'd both been involved in Methodist Church and young people's activities in Kerrville before we came over here. So as soon as we got here, in 52, 53 in there too, they also wanted us to get into Boy Scouts and the youth work over at the Methodist Church. So Francis predominantly had the youth department at the Methodist Church, and I took the Boy Scouts, and we kept that going for quite a few years.
He received the Silver Beaver, and the youngest one to receive that honor.
What is the
He won't
Silver
say-
Beaver?
Well, tell her about
It's
it.
just a award for beyond the normal expenditure of people's time and activities in Boy Scouting,
Mhm.
and they award.
Well,
two
they
or
still,
three
the
of
Methodist Church still has one of the strongest Boy Scout troops in the city to this day, so
That's
you
right.
laid a great foundation for
Yes,
the
ma'am.
Boy Scouts.
Yes, ma'am.
That's right.
Yes, ma'am.
And a strong youth crew. What were some of the big issues back when you served on city council? What was pressing in the community at that time?
Well, it was a lot of the things were over what we still experience today, the growth, streets and water, such as that. It wasn't so much housing then as it was just access around town. They followed along there with Sesame Drive about that same time, and water plants, sewer plants were the main things that were coming on that needed to be done. And of course, some of us were pushing for loops around town even back then in the 70s. This is back up in the 70s now. We've jumped ahead a good ways.
Right. We
Up
missed the
into the
60s.
70s. And we never did get one built.
wanted that.
Kept pushing for them, and such as that, just general things that were going on. We had a lot of confusion over drugs about that time, and about the time that long hair came into the picture in schools, and
Now,
Bill
there was-
Cook and
yeah.
some of them got real involved with.
Tell us about that controversy about the long hair. That made the national news, Francis. Were you involved in that?
Well, not exactly. I didn't have anybody that had long hair. I had some friends. Well, it wasn't that long, but it was just a sad thing because it turned friends, you know, to one side or the other. And I never could understand why hair was such a big issue, but it was for some. And the crooks got into it, and so they had many meetings, you know, and discussing what they could do. But I stayed away from that. Controversy is not.
So it was how long the boys could wear their hair at
Yes.
school, and
Oh, I remember too, Dawn came home one day and told me that her skirt was too short, that if her hand didn't come to the bottom of her skirt, you know, things like that. I don't see how that mixes well with education, Sue. You know, I couldn't quite come
I grew up in Corpus Christi, and we had the same issues
Yeah.
in Corpus. That
And now, look what we have. you
and
know.
now they wear their pajamas to school.
No, I
If
have a
we
friend
had
who-
known.
I have a friend who taught up there, and she sent them home. She said, "I'm not going to teach you in your pajamas." And so anybody
Well, girls
came to-
weren't allowed to wear pants to school when I was in high school, and boys' hair was not allowed to touch their collar.
Well,
And the
you're
boys would
right.
lengthen their neck, and we would take our skirts and staple them up. When we
Oh,
got, that was when mini
Sit
skirts
right.
were in style, and our parents would get the call that we got kicked out of school, and we'd pull the staples or the masking tape out and pull that skirt back down and stand there and say, "They're picking on me. We didn't do a thing." And our parents could never figure out why we got sent home, because our skirts were long enough when we left, but we shortened them.
Well, when Dawn was first in school, they didn't let them wear pants, and I just remember ironing those dresses all the time, because that's what she wore.
We
You
yeah.
know, you remember that, I guess, but at any rate, so it's just interesting how
So your kids are how far apart?
3 years between Dawn and Stacy, and between Stacy and Jamie, and there was 12 years between 7 years between Jamie and Erin. So Erin really grew up with the grown-up kids. She had always liked to be with the big girls.
So you had kids in elementary,
I had
junior,
spread
and
all
high
around.
school. They were spread over all. So you did a lot of driving.
Oh yes. I remember changing dirty diapers in the front seat of my car while Dawn took twirling lessons at Danley. I forgot now what her first name was, but anyway. So things just happen. They just happen, and it's interesting.
What other things were y'all involved in? I know you've been involved in a lot of the community events that, Summerfest and.
Mm-hmm. Well, Summer in the Park, I chaired for 6 years. I was responsible for those programs and contracts. So it really took me into an interesting, arena. I'd never done anything like that. But Dave Fleming was a production man. He helped, and his son helped with the sound and the whole thing. Loved it. I just love seeing people come and enjoy the things that we provided for them. I have been in about 4 plays that the San Marcos Performing Arts did. I was Aunt Ella in Oklahoma, and we did 3 others. The one with the children. My mind's forgotten what that one was, but Andrea Haberlin choreographed that for us. We were happy to have her come aboard and help us. But
well, kind of long before that time, the whole town got mixed up in the Olympiad.
oh, that's right.
Oh, I forgot about that.
That kept us busy for a long time, and
That started on the grounds of Ocarina back in the
Started out
70s,
First
and
one.
right.
Willie Nelson, and
From
Best one they ever
Ocarina,
had.
finally moved it out to the show barn, the county's show barn, and carried it on out there for a long time. Had 4-H, got involved with 4-H way back. We
Mhm.
started
He's
with
always
4-H
been
shows. Jack Harper and some of his family were kind enough to let us use a barn where Walmart is now. There was a big tin barn in there that we used for the 4-H, and then we moved it down to where when we had the last picture show, not picture show, when we had the shoot 'em up picture show
Oh,
here.
yeah, with
the
Steve
getaway.
McQueen,
The
the
getaway.
When there was a building where the bus station is now on Guadalupe Street. There was a big barn in there. We used that for 4-H for a while, and then they burned it down. We blew it up, burned it down for the getaway. And,
oh, they did? That was part of that
There were
movie?
several buildings that
we got real involved in that picture show. Those guys were always the
What did you do for the picture show?
well, the
movie?
show people were always stuff for that they needed for the productions.
Your electrical company helped to blow things up and light them up
Well,
and
no,
stuff?
we got things for them that they needed to put into the pictures. Where they were down underground, they needed a cable and cable cutters and all that kind of stuff. And then a bunch of some of the scenes, they came up and got a lot of stuff out of my warehouse for old antique light fixtures and stuff.
Has your business always been located there this whole time on CM Allen?
Well, I started out in the ladies' garage where W.C. Carson bought all that land next to the little yellow store. I had a garage rented back in there from a lady that I used for a storeroom, and then I was on San Antonio Street, across from where Clyde's
Justin's beauty shop.
boys are now. They're right on that corner, the alley. The electric company. When we moved here, the electric company in town was Central Power and Light, was just changing over to LCRA, and their office, Central Power and Light's office, is where, kind of where the museum, almost where the LBJ Museum is now. That was Central Power and Light's office, and behind them they had a warehouse, right behind them that I had that rented for a good while for a warehouse, and when Crowell Marney back up when Central Power and Light turned into LCRA, they shut it down. Bob Pollard quit the electric company and went over to First National Bank, went to work for them. And
That's Bobby Gilbert's father?
LCRA took over all the electric then, and they so Crowell Marney bought that property and tore it all down, built a Crowell Marney drugstore. Ms. Marney was a Bass, and Bass was where the county records office is at the corner of Hopkins and Guadalupe Street.
What year did they build that Kroll Barney Pharmacy,
They
roughly?
built that about 1955, 56, somewhere along in there. They
Bass Drugstore was on the corner, and they just moved on down. Kroll was her father. It was Kroll Marney. Mr. Kroll was in on that, so they named it Barney Pharmacy. Beautiful store.
Yeah, that's where the building still is there
Mhm.
now, by
It
the
sure
LBJ
is. It sure
Museum.
is.
It's a
They
print
just had
shop
the-
or something in
I
there.
thought
They had
that
the
building
whole
was older. What was there before they built that building?
Which
Something had to
building?
have been there. The
The
Kroll
Kroll-Marnie.
Marnie.
That was the old CP&L store.
So they
Oh,
tore that
There was a
down.
grocery store right next to it. Williams Grocery
Mhm.
Store was next to it, and then there was Mr. Shoehart. Old man Shoehart had a hardware store there, and then Hills Auto Supply was at the corner of Santonia, corner of Santonia and Guadalupe Street was Hills Auto Supply.
Is that where the Ford dealership was, or was it across
it
the
was
street?
across
Ford
the street.
Ford
dealership.
dealership's across the street.
They built, that was built for Mr.
Which one? What do you
Ford
think?
dealer.
Oh,
His
Red
son.
Simon.
Greg.
No,
Simon
no,
Greg.
before Simon.
Oh,
no,
Greg.
No, Simon bought it from.
But there was another one.
His son died. His son had leukemia or cancer or something. Jack Hughes.
Jack Hughes.
Jack
right.
Hughes built that building on the corner, and Gene Scrutchen was a general contractor here, built it for him. And Jack Hughes took that over and then sold it to Simon, Red Simon, when he was working for him part of the time. Red Simon, I think he's still alive. He used to sell cars for everybody in town.
He was the car dealer.
Car dealer and a half, yeah. Right.
How has the business climate changed over the years? Was it easier to do business back then?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. Everything was a whole lot slower. It wasn't fast.
Was this
Mr. Price
handshake? Did
came-
you have to have a building permit back then?
No, we didn't have building permits until somewhere up in the '60s, I guess I helped organize the first electric board. We had organized an electric board in Kerrville before I left there. Just started. We didn't have license in Kerrville before I left up there. Before '51, there were no license here. And you didn't have to have a written license here until up, I guess, into the '60s, just about. But Mr. Shoehart had that store, and Mr. Hill, and Ms. Her husband was a lawyer. Owned several of those buildings in there. I can't remember now. Who's the judge? The district judge here. Ramsey. Ms. Ramsey owned a bunch of those
Yes, that's
properties
right.
in there. And then Mr. Price came in and bought the old building for the telephone company. The telephone company was in a little two-story building right across, well, Weast was across the street eventually, but
Where Patrick Rose
I
bought.
don't remember
you
what
know.
that was then.
That was the Weiss.
But,
Yes.
Mr. Price bought the phone company, and that was a good challenge to me. We converted a lot of electrical stuff over in there to all his new equipment. And as he was very modern then, he put in went to more numbers in the dialing system and the phone system before he went to dialing. Dialing came later on. Then he moved down onto what is now Martin Luther King and Guadalupe Street, where the Century Telephone Company
That's
is located
right.
now. He bought a small piece of property and put it right on the corner. That's where he got into the dialing phone system.
And you did a lot of that electrical
We
work?
did a lot of electrical work.
You
But
probably wired 90% of the buildings in this town.
Well, there weren't many electricians here then.
Right.
I remember Mr. There's a Quonset hut, talking about Quonset huts a while ago. There's a Quonset hut where the cleaning shop is on Guadalupe Street now.
Comet.
Comet Cleaners. That was, man built that building for Studebaker car dealership. And remember he sold a new car to Mr.
Zimmerman?
No, the bakery, Simon
Oh,
Bakery.
Simon Bakery. Mhm.
And Mr. they paid them off in silver dollars and quarters and coins, and when all those coins hit the banks, all the coin collectors around here were real anxious to get to the banks to get the silver, because there were a lot of antique coins that he had. He had grown up in
paid
the
for a
Depression,
car?
back before the Depressions, when they were afraid the dollars weren't worth anything, so he bought lots of silver. He put a lot of his money in silver coins, and all those coins hit the banks, and everybody went to banks to get those coins.
I didn't know that.
And
He hadn't told me that.
I can't remember the man's name that built that car dealership in there, but it's a cleaning shop now.
That was a pretty good bakery down there, that
No, we've
Simon's
watched the town
Bakery.
change around all the way
Yeah,
around.
it's totally,
Duke and Ayers was on the corner
That's right.
of Guadalupe and Hopkins Street. Duke and Ayers 5 and 10 cent store was in there, and then Woods Jewelry Store was next to him.
Alan Woods.
And
You remember Alan, I bet.
mhm.
there were several
and the
women-
clothing stores that were
women's
there,
clothing
yeah.
stores were in there, and then
Bergen's, yeah.
Harrison's.
Oh,
Next,
yes.
Bill
Gilberts Store.
Hilburn had the drugstore at the alley on Hopkins Street, and then
It was a
Harrison's
collection.
store, and then Woods Men's store.
Yeah, there was a collection.
And then Miss Schroer had the corner.
Well, there were no shopping centers. All the shopping was
That
down
was all
on the
shopping was
square.
downtown. There was
On the
no-
square.
And were there any other grocery stores besides that Weast?
There was
Williams. or
Mr.
something?
Williams had one on the
And Hartley
on
had
the
one.
west side of the square, and Mr. Hartley was over next about where we are now. He's Mr. Kyle next door here, somewhere right in here. There was a Hartley's grocery store. Then there was a that turned into a 5 and 10 cent, not 5 and 10 cent.
A hardware store. Gary and.
Gary and Pfeiffer had a
Yeah.
appliance store.
Mhm.
Frigidaires and appliance store between here and the First National Bank. There was, I don't remember what other business were in there. Miss Hoffines had a cafe.
The cafe. People talk about going to the cafe for their coffee and their pie. What was the name of that
That's right.
cafe? It-
Hoffines,
Yeah.
Miss Hoffines.
People talk about that was where you went when you were
Yeah.
down on the downtown.
And there was a Greek family that had a restaurant there too. I bet.
Well,
Yes.
and down by the theater on San Antonio Street.
What was the name of that?
Can't remember the man's
Holiday.
name.
It was a holiday one time.
No,
There were several
next
people
to
there.
it.
But next to it was the cafe. The man's name was George.
I can't remember the old man's name.
No.
But he had a
Papa's-
cafe
Papa's-
in there.
Papa's.
Papa's, that's right. Mhm.
And they lived upstairs. Of course, all the downtown stores, when originally built, everybody lived upstairs and had their business downstairs. And like the Simons at the bakery, they all lived upstairs,
Right.
and they had the bakery downstairs.
That's the influence of
And,
European. That's the way the Europeans
Uh-huh.
had their
West.
businesses.
All around the square, everybody lived upstairs.
Did
and
you
had
charge
their
your
business
groceries?
down- Did what?
We didn't shop only at Weast when we came to some office. We shopped there. I didn't ever go in those other stores.
Weast was like a fancier grocery
well, then
store.
It was,
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, when Harvey came to town, that was really the thing. Really a
Harvey
fancy,
Weast.
really a big grocery store.
Yeah.
Harvey was from Seguin, and he was a very energetic man that had lots of energy.
And you look at the size of that building now compared to our little HEB. I mean, that Weast was tiny.
Well,
You know, they opened up another one where
we-
the
Springtown.
No, they opened it up over there in where the Meeks. It was an empty. For years, you know, there was an empty space there, and they developed that little mall there.
on LB, what is now LBJ.
Where the Sherwin
At
Williams
University
Yes,
is? That's
yes,
where the
that's it,
Weast,
right on
the
the
second
corner.
Weast grocery store
That's right.
was?
They had two.
On the backside over on Edward Geary Street. We had a store where
Kinko's.
Kinko's.
That's what I was trying to think.
And then
Kinko's
J.C.
and
Penney's
FedEx.
was down on the corner of
Oh.
Hopkins and LBJ. And that was,
And-
wasn't that where Penny's was?
It's not LBJ. It was Hopkins and Hutchison, wasn't it? No, LBJ, You're right.
It's
I'm
that
sorry.
big
Yeah,
two-story
yeah.
building
Talking about-
was
Yeah.
JCPenney's.
JCPenney's. It was there on the corner.
Because the two stores were JCPenney's and Paul Bruner's, the big
Mhm.
I guess department stores that we
Mhm.
had.
Bruner's was on the opposite part of
JCPenney's
the corner.
was on Hopkins, next to Wood Brothers, on Hopkins Street.
So Jewelers there, and then Colgan Jewelers was right down the block.
Culligan
From- yeah.
Jewelry was
Down from
over on
Penny's.
what is now LBJ Street.
Right.
Mhm.
There was Mr. Zimmerman built a 5 and 10 cent store in between there somewhere, where
Oh, Ben Franklin.
Ben
Yes.
Franklin,
You remember
he had a
Ben
Ben
Franklin,
Franklin store in there.
Yeah.
But,
Lovely people.
Then Mr. Butt, HEB, decided they'd come to San Marcos.
And where was their first store?
They
When
built
it
down on
The old Justice
where
Center.
the plumbing shop is now on South LBJ and Martin Luther King.
oh, that's where the first
That's where
HEB
the
was.
first one- And then
They
moved
built
across
a
the
small,
street.
they built one 10,000-foot square building.
Oh, the old Justice Center.
Mhm.
That-
No,
no,
well,
they
that
moved
was, that
it.
was later on.
I know,
They
but
built
Okay.
across the street first.
Oh,
They
no,
built-
we got that.
They built across the street first, a store, and then they added on to it twice. And then we moved across the street and built the Justice Center. We did the electrical work on all of it.
Wow.
I knew the Butt family from Kerrville. The electrician that I worked for in Kerrville did most of their stores up till this was the last one they did here. They did one in Del Rio, and that was the last one we got into. They got too big for us to do
Well, they have their own
after
committee
this one
now.
here.
They have their own
But,
crew now.
Well, they have other electricians
Mhm.
a whole lot bigger than what we could do. But we graduated on along through town and watched it develop and all the way around, and we bought and sold and traded properties, and some of them we had to get rid of, and some of them we wished we'd kept, and all that sort of thing as time goes by. We did the electrical work for the university on the football, not the football stadium that's there
The
now,
baseball
but we
stadium.
rebuilt the old Evans Field a couple of times. We did the baseball fields from the ground up, and
Jamie
that
was
we have now.
superintendent for
Jamie
that.
was pretty much in charge of that, and we've done a lot of follow-up repair work on football stadiums. We used to do work on the highway department for the highway lights, and it got too much for us. The insurance requirements and all that sort of thing are beyond what I want to take on to. The risk that you have on highways today is just out of this world.
Right.
And I just don't want to ask for that kind of a problem. But
And all four of your kids ended up living and working in San Marcos, which is kind of unique. A lot of kids
They
grow
love
up
San
and
Marcos.
move away. They all graduated from the San Marcos High School.
Yeah. And Dawn graduated from Southwest Texas State University. Stacy, of course,
He
received
went
a
to A&M.
scholarship to go to A&M. So he,
played 4 years
he-
football.
yeah, well, he
On
did.
Henry Ballard at A&M
I didn't
in
know that.
the 70s, yeah. They just
But he got
through
married,
with
and
it.
so they came back here, and he started working for Ted, and had their first child, Crystal, and that's where he is now. That's where he will be after we retire, if he
Yeah, I was
ever
going to say,
retires.
when are you going to retire, you two?
I don't know, one of these days. Every day's a new day, and everything is so
New
interesting.
challenge, yeah.
I tell young people all the time that every day's a new day. That's what Ernest Cummings used to say. Every other day's a Saturday or something like that.
Yeah, he was.
But
He was a neat person.
there are a lot of interesting things going on today that we need to keep people involved in. Our
Well, you-
community, everybody needs to be involved in what's going on in our community today. Everybody.
And you guys
take
are
an
still
interest, take a
very
part in it.
involved.
Take a part in it. Thermon Corporation has been one of our bigger customers. We've worked for them and watched them grow from the time that Dick Burdick moved here. With the help of John Stokes and a bunch of people that had the Industrial Foundation kind of a deal put together then, and helped organizations come here, Mensor and Thermon. And
Everybody knew everybody back then.
everybody knew everybody.
And business
right?
was more of a handshake type
Yes,
thing.
ma'am.
And
Yes, ma'am.
That's what was such fun about Gilberts. That's where everybody would go for coffee. And the joke was that a lot of things were decided court-wise. All the lawyers got there and talked things
At
out
the pharmacy.
over a cup of coffee. Yeah.
And your kids probably couldn't get away with anything because you knew everybody in town and they'd tell you what they'd been up to, right?
The funniest thing happened when the juniors decided to grease the flagpole so the seniors couldn't put their flag up. And at that time, Ted had one of those what they call cherry picker trucks. So they called Ted to go to go put the flag up for the seniors, and never realized it was Dawn that was behind all of that.
She greased the flagpole?
Well, her class did, yeah. But and of course they didn't know it, but they called Ted to come and relieve the situation. It was funny. Well, she told that to us years and years,
That's funny.
later, but it was fun.
That's
Oh
funny.
yeah.
Okay, tell me about Walling's Creamery. Where was that? What kind of business was that?
Walling's Creamery was where the Broadway Bank
Uh-huh.
is now on University Drive. He had a dairy. He processed milk. He bought it from the dairies out here in the country, and he processed the milk and made ice cream, and sold milk and ice cream. And he had a kind of like a bar inside there where they made milkshakes. All the university students hung out in there, and had ice cream milkshakes in that way.
And burgers.
He was a good community man. He loved golf. He was very handicapped. He ruined a leg at playing football, so he was kind of handicapped to get around. So football boys liked him because he really liked them because they understood what football was about, getting hurt. And next to it was Ms. Murray. Ms. Murray had a fruit stand on there on it's University Drive now. It used to be what was Colorado Street, maybe something like that, by the university's parks things there. Ms. Murray hauled in vegetables from all over the place and sold them. And good old lady, hard-working woman, just worked real hard, had a big family, and sold vegetables there. She was kind of like Alvin Day. Alvin Day was an institution in himself. Had a little grocery store across the river from Strand Gym now. He had a little grocery store there, and of course with all the student housing, married GI housing, nobody had any money. And Alvin Day had books back there full of thousands of dollars, and he'd loan people money to buy groceries. He'd give them groceries when they didn't have any money. But he was a good man that way. There was another, I can't remember the grocery man's name, but had a grocery store on San Antonio Street. Well, there's an employment business in there right now, next to where Ross King owns some building next to Clyde Hardware. Used to be in there on San Antonio Street. Man had a grocery store in there that was the same way. He had a whole rack full of books, little bitty books where he charged things to people, and no telling how many thousands of dollars that he wrote off that people couldn't pay him. And,
wow.
A lot of good people like that, which really made San Marcos what it is today. Growing up that way.
Yeah, strong community.
Let her ask you some questions now.
Yeah.
Well,
So how is San Marcos changing? Is it changing for the better?
Oh yes, it definitely is changing for the better. We've got a top-notch school of the United States here. I'd put this school against any school in the United States right now in all the different aspects that it has gotten into, and they're just now really getting deep into the engineering, which I've been pushing for years, and with $2-3 here and there. I never had any kind of money like they got now, but we're going to be on top of the world here with an engineering school pretty quick. They've been funded, and it's going to get built. It's a lot of millions of dollars going to go into it. But from the liberal arts to the sports to all the way through not just a teacher school anymore. I've got an old annual here, 1909, and it was just all education then. They didn't think about anything else but learning poetry and all that sort of thing.
Well, the whole balance has changed in town. When you first moved here, what'd you say, 3,000 students, 4,000?
That's right.
It wasn't 4,000, it was less than
Between
3,000 students, and now there's 34,000.
Yeah.
And now there's more students than residents, it seems. So the balance has really shifted to where the university is a huge part, a bigger part of the community than it was when y'all first moved here.
Definitely. I remember people telling me they only had a couple of shows after we came here, but they had aquatic. It was called aquatic dancing, where they did all of the things you'd see on television down at Sewell Park. You know, that was interesting.
Like water ballet?
Yeah, ballet. Yes, that's it. Thank you. Oh, yes.
And who did that? The university?
The physical education department people would do that. So that was their entertainment for the summer. You know, but we've moved on to all different kinds of things now. Art-wise, it's just exciting what's happening.
You've been involved in the arts heavily involved. Talk about some of that.
Well, basically, people that were interested, like the Yeagers came, and John Belisle at the university did all of the summer productions that we had. So there was interest coming out of that department. We could use the students that were going into the band arena would be in the orchestra for our productions. So we used things from all the departments, drama, where we had the sets and things done by students. So it was a good time. Now the university's grown so with their own productions that it's difficult for them to be involved in the community thing, but then it's good for us so we can go. You know,
our community theater used to be merged with the university. Now we have separate.
In the summer. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, they have their own
productions together,
yeah.
and not as much anymore.
Biggest thing that happened in San Marcos that
what
they can remember, was it the getaway? What was the thing that had everybody on fire?
The biggest thing that you can remember happening in this community that got tongues a wagging.
LBJ coming to speak one time. I remember everybody in town. Do you remember? Were you here? I kept trying to get your number.
I can't remember.
Well, at any rate, it was big. And
where did he speak?
Well, he actually, that place where he slept for a couple of days there, and that's where it was held. And of course, there wasn't the building that's there.
Was he president when he came, or was he running for office?
Yeah.
He was president.
So that was one of the biggest things we ever had happen. But and of course the change in our shopping when the mall was built, that has really been
the outlet mall.
The outlet mall was, and there was pros and cons. Some people were happy to see it. It changed downtown. Most of the people that had small boutiques and businesses were affected by the mall. So
and it changed our tourism up until the mall. We used to be known for Ocarina Springs and Wonder World, and then when the outlet mall came, we're known for our outlet mall.
That's right.
Which is
people moved past the Swimming Pig. They went on to San Antonio, where they could see, all of the events and things that are held down there, all the parks and things. So it served its time.
Yeah, Ocarina.
Great. Yeah, it did. Our children learned to swim down there.
Down they used to have a community pool, a membership pool. That's where
we
used to swim. Yeah.
And every afternoon, all the ladies came down and visited and watched the kids. And
they had a limited number of memberships. I remember when my daughter was born, trying to get a membership at Ocarina was hard, but she wanted to get one.
That's right. And then the people, the ranching era, that arena, they built the country club. And we had a golf course, and our entertainment and all of that sort of thing moved to that area out there. So we've grown in lots of ways.
The worst,
good ways.
The worst thing that ever happened.
The restaurants.
The worst. The worst thing.
The biggest
tragedy.
A
Flood
natural
or something
disaster that happened.
Not as much as what we just experienced. There have been some things, but can you think of anything particular that was more than what we experienced this past Memorial Day?
No, we've had several smaller instances. They've had one hurricane came through one time through the north side of town and through the old Holiday Inn.
With tornadoes, right?
Tornado, whatever it was. Tornado left over from a hurricane kind of deal. And tore a lot of things up in the rest home and a bunch of stuff. But the flood that we had quite a few years ago was when it flooded the whole lower part of town.
That was 1972.
This one just affected one area, but that one got from the university all the way back up to across through town.
Well, they built Watershed Dam, and they finally built the loop that you wanted, sort of. We have half a loop. Where did you think the loop should have gone? Where would you have put the loop?
It needs to go further. Get into it now, but the loop needs to go further out. That's an inside boulevard. The new 110 is should be considered now an inside boulevard because you add up what they're proposed for it to do is to go on across the Blanco River in front of Camp Gary, between Camp Gary and where 121, where Highway 21 crosses Highway 80 comes together. They proposed that road to go on across towards Yerington Road, past the front gate of Camp Gary, and then head to Yerington Road. Well, that's fine, except you're going to bring all the traffic from Highway 21. You don't want to get it down to McCarty Lane. You come to McCarty Lane, and how you going to get the traffic that's in front of Walmart now? That traffic plus the traffic from the new Enterprise going in next to
Amazon.
Going in next to
Amazon
going in next to the
Embassy
hotel,
Suites.
Embassy Suites. You try to put all that traffic plus the high school traffic. You put it all together on McCarty Lane, it's not going to work. It doesn't take much of a magician to figure that out.
You just have to look at Austin and see where we might be pretty quick.
Right.
They didn't build a loop around Austin, and they're
everybody
gridlocked.
thought, in Austin, everybody thought they were going to get on Mopac and come downtown. So they built Mopac, started it out, Mopac bring everybody downtown. That's where they're going to come shopping. But that blew out with the shopping centers in the outlying area. We need to go out back of the high school with the loop, back of the high school. I'm sorry, it'll go through part of some subdivisions that are being built by the new elementary school on Seguin Highway, to go through there and come on down to Hunter, towards Posey Road. So you make an outside loop. Then the west, you're going around west there. They've started on that to go through by the Baptist Academy and come around that way. There's always a debate about land that is on the aquifer. You go to Austin, whoever thought back in the early 1950s, I bid on water lines to be built through Cedar Park. They had no water at all. About 3 or 4 inch water lines, what they were trying to put in out there. Because in the early 50s, that was all a drought area, from Cedar Park to Liberty Hill, that whole area. Now look what they're doing. They're building multi-million-dollar houses on top of those rock piles. That's where people want to live.
Maybe you need to retire and run for city council again. Get back into politics, Ted.
People have asked about it.
I mean, you have quite the experience.
Well, one of the things that happened was that the mayor at that time, our Lady General, didn't want San Marcos to be big.
Democratic.
She did not. Yeah, she did not. She did not.
She and I are different. We had totally different opinions
about
it.
You know, she didn't
Totally
have the
different.
vision. I don't think that Ted does. I mean, I'm just going to brag on him. He has
Brag
vision,
on him.
and he knows more about roads and things that maybe engineers even know. It amazes me what he knows. But we can't get by the flood that took the pumpkins down the river.
Oh, yeah.
That you talk about the things that happened. That was a funny thing, but they never did go with the pumpkins again. And the Heritage Association has done a lot of wonderful things as far as the Cock House. That was started in '74.
And y'all have been involved in that.
I was in a meeting in San Antonio at a restaurant when that all got decided.
Anything you can do to get older people to get out
To start
and
the
go
luncheons.
do things together is good.
Is it?
It's good. You need
But
to
it
get
was
them
fun.
to get up, get out of bed, and go do something.
Well,
I don't care, don't do anything, just go
What-
down and eat dinner and then go home.
now,
go
just
back to
because
bed.
you were an
Is it
Energizer bunny.
Now, what would you say the secret is to your 64-year marriage and your driving around town in a red convertible these days, Miss Bryan?
Well, we don't.
Y'all are pretty peppy.
Well, we don't vacation. We never really vacation.
Really?
No, we took the kids to Six Flags when they were little, but we haven't really done anything like
Well, we
that.
used to go snow skiing.
Well, one time.
No,
It was too
4 or 5
cold under
times.
So y'all stay close to San Marcos?
Yeah, well, really, and that's, at this point, it's not feasible for us to go. And I enjoy just my community. I don't have to go anywhere else. I laugh that when I die, I'll be going anywhere I want to. I can visit any place I want to. I won't have to worry about flying or reservations. I'll just.
Now y'all have been
Dip
members
in.
of the Methodist Church since you moved here in
Oh, yes,
1951,
yes. Mhm.
That's right.
That's right.
and you've been very involved there. You've rewired that church how many times?
Several times. Several times.
Each renovation, you redone the church,
That's right.
Well,
and you've been active in the programs
Oh,
at
yes.
the church.
I've done children's choir. I directed the handbell choir for 40
Right.
years and sung in the choir and other things. I worked with it was called WSCS then, the women's organization. So, no, they're just things to do, and you just filled your spot.
That little historic building is being overcome by growth, though. Y'all have some challenges with the parking at the church.
Exactly. We've gotten some relief from HEB, who's given us some parking spaces, and across the street.
well,
we
we
have some.
sold the store that that owned that land when we sold the land. We only used to own part of the land on that side of
The
the
church
street.
did. Mhm.
The HEB down at Fredericksburg and Hutchinson. And when we sold that land to them, we kept parking
Mhm,
spaces.
mhm.
And
Well, they allowed that.
Mr. Scrutchin had his motor company is partially close to where the bank, Ozona Bank is now, used to be Scrutchin Motor
Motor
Company.
company. Ann's dad.
And
Yeah.
when Mr. Scrutchin, when newer cars started coming on, well, he didn't have enough room in that place, so he bought the land across the street next to Simon Bakery, the corner of Fredericksburg and Hopkins. He bought that and built a new car make-ready department over there. And so when we sold the land to Kroger's, Safeway and that bunch, built the grocery stores where HEB is now, we took that money and we bought that corner. Scrutchin had moved out. It was Weedy Tire and Battery, and we bought that corner, which is now our church's activity center.
Scrutchin moved out to where Bishop Nash is now.
Right.
And as time progressed, we bought the Simon Bakery building and made it into where Twice Blessed is now, which is one of the better organizations in San Marcos as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of other people too, that Twice Blessed is making to
What
me,
is
make
Twice? Tell us what it is.
older people, middle-aged people get up and go. They come down there and they sit around down there and they enjoy talking to each other and selling merchandise and making money for the church.
Well, it's a type of thrift shop, but a
It's,
very upscale.
And it gives money not just to the church, it raises money. They have posted on the wall inside the store of all the
Correct.
community organizations they give money to.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful, wonderful
It's,
thing. And they're very careful. We had a wonderful woman, Joanne Childress, who worked with the Junior League in Austin. That's how it all got started. She was a member of our church, and so she was able to set everything in place about how to open and what the regulations should be, and so that's why it has stayed one of the better thrift situations that we have in San Marcos.
And it's been there like 15
Oh
years?
yes, at least. Mhm.
Yeah, it's just a good organization.
It gives other women that
Serves
found a
good
place to
purpose.
work in the church a
Right.
good opportunity to work
Right.
there, and they enjoy it. People that move away call back and say, how are things going at the
thrift shop?
Yes, at the thrift shop.
Anything else that you would want to tell us about for the ages? Just anything else you want to put on this tape? Tell us about?
Well, I'd like for you all to ask what your interest would be. Obviously, we've had some impact, I guess you would say, here, but that's just the way our belief system is, that you come and become involved in a community. Whatever your talent is, you share it and you move from there. So, I don't know, I've just loved a lot of aspects of being in town. It's good to be between San Antonio and Austin, first of all. There are things that are an advantage there. But the hospital has grown continuously.
Well, your kids were born at the hospital on Thorpe Lane?
No,
No.
they were born in Kerrville. My mother was still
One
alive,
was
and so
born here.
yeah, one was born. Earl
Oh, so
was
you
born
went
here.
home to have your babies?
Well, it worked out for my mother to be, you know, she was happy about that.
She was better, her mother was a better nurse than I was.
Well, not exactly that.
No,
But
it's
it was interesting because the doctor that delivered our children, I babysat his children when I was in high school. I was growing up, and he lived down the street, so it all worked out.
And you mentioned before we started that you were, before you got married in 1951, you were Miss Kerrville and were in the Miss Texas pageant?
I was in the Miss Texas contest.
Before he swept you down here to San Marcos?
Well, I think that was kind of in the plan anyway, you know, and that worked out. But I met a lovely family, Logan, that lived across the street from Bill Pennington's funeral home. And I don't know whether you ever got to know Ann Logan or not, but so I had a wonderful aspect of contact with wonderful people. So it was a big experience. But
Where was the pageant, the
in
state
New
pageant?
Braunfels, in New Braunfels, and those
Land
people
apart.
at Land Apart, they just outdid themselves in being kind to us. And the way we were treated, it was really we stayed in the Faust Hotel downtown.
Wow.
You know where that is
Uh-huh.
in New Braunfels. So those are just some of the
And then you took
experiences.
that talent and came here for many years, for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. We used to have the Junior
Junior
Miss
Miss.
pageant,
That's right.
and you
That's
did the
right.
talent for that.
I was on that committee.
And that was for our junior girls in high school, and
That's
it
right,
was
going into their senior year.
a scholarship, and
Wonderful, because it gave them all kinds of workable experiences. They learned how to first walk in high heels because got them out of their tennis shoes. But I like that they used Biv Underwood to do interviews so that they passed high school. If they wanted to apply for a job, they would know what to do.
I mean, that was one of the
That was
big
very-
things in this community.
It was.
What other big things, like holidays and special occasions, big things that we used to have that we don't have anymore? I mean, Sights and Sounds of Christmas, we've had that about 30 years.
Robert, his nephew, has had his hand in that, and I'm glad to see it's going to continue. Robert has just worked himself to death with that, keeping it going, and that's one of the most exciting community events that we could have. I mean, when you think about 30,000 people coming to participate in that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. Plus, they loved San Marcos. People that came over for summer in the park had not been here before, but surrounding
Of course,
communities came and they loved it. So you see, it all works for
We'll
good.
go back to our educational system. The organization that we had out at Camp Gary, converting the Air Force over to Camp Gary, was a good thing for San Marcos.
It was controversial, though, when that happened.
Did what?
It was controversial.
Yeah.
They took
Well-
the old Air Force. Tell them about what they did out there. That was an Air Force training base.
Well, they converted it to helicopter training on private contract, and then when Camp Gary came along, well, it's sorry that it happened that way, but their first round, they brought a whole lot of boys down here from other parts of the country that were not just looking for a better way of life, they were just looking for something different. And San Marcos wasn't really the place for them, to be honest about it.
That's right.
Frank.
That was in the early 70s.
That was not the best go-round, the first round, but it is now takes on a lot of students right now that wouldn't have a chance to get any kind of education, and they're still doing that. It's open to, we have some of their students that work for us now on a work release program.
And you're teaching them the electric trade?
Through
right.
part of their training, and then they go back and they either work for us or work for somebody else. Which all aspects of their training, not just electrical, but they have the computer program and the basic theories of business operation, bookkeeping and
They've
everything
got
else.
culinary arts
That's
out
right.
there.
Their whole program has been a big help in Central Texas.
And upgraded.
Did LBJ help bring some of that funding here? How did we get that federally funded program here? Do you know?
I think LBJ just started up. He was working from South Texas all the way through here with programs for LBJ, and I didn't agree to a lot of things, but a lot of things I did. And the educational part of his programs were great. He used to teach school down in the valley, which a lot of people know below San Antonio, and he saw firsthand what was going on with the migrant kids down there, and they had nothing and they weren't learning anything. And when he started all his education programs in our valley all the way down, was a good thing for that, and that for Camp Gary came out. All the Job Corps came out of his pushing and his drive to better the lives for people that he'd been around that had nothing. And I can compliment him for that. That's the reason I spent the time that I spent. We've had a lot of great people in San Marcos, go all the way back through Roger Story and all of them that have come up through here that were, you might say, rough, tough guys that business was hard, either the oil business or wholesale grocery business. That San Marcos was a landing point for groceries for all of Central Texas for many, many years, with all the railroads that we had that divided here in San Marcos and joined in San Marcos. But all the way through that, it's been kind of a central place that way.
You're one of the few businesses that started back in the 50s that's still operating,
Exactly.
but you've seen so many pioneers that helped make San Marcos what it was today with all those businesses.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
You can run through the whole list of them and what they did. And LBJ, the time I spent on LBJ's board here at the LBJ Museum, John Cooper was his dream was to start the LBJ Museum and to build it up as a memory of the days that LBJ spent in San Marcos.
Right.
Education
As a
wise.
student
Yeah,
Right.
he wanted
schooling.
it to be more
That's what he was
educational.
emphasizing, and the education part of what LBJ was back of as far as the education went. And so I promised John I'd stay with that until we got the building built. And
On his feet.
we've got a good board now that's carrying it on, and it'll keep on going now.
Lots of stuff. Well, y'all have made quite the impact on San Marcos. Any final thoughts of reflection on your 64 years at San Marcos? As active, involved citizens, we really can't thank you enough for everything you've done for this community, really.
Well, we've just wanted to, you might say, pay back what we've got, you know. It's just, we've enjoyed it, and we enjoy watching other people grow and develop and move on out into the world.
Well, San Marcos has enjoyed you, and so thank you very much for sharing all this with us today. We appreciate it.